And it looks like we are live. Awesome. How's everybody doing today? Thank you so much for joining us on a Sunday afternoon to chat about the art of suspense. I am Jocelyn from AutoCrit, and we are excited to partner with Thriller Fest this year and connect with our guests. And we are going to talk the art of suspense. So, would you guys like to introduce yourself? Tell us a little bit about your books and what you've got going on. I guess that would be great. So, Robert, you want to go first?
You want me to go first? I was going to do alphabetical order here.
Alphabetical works.
Sure. My name's Bob Dugoni. Pen name is Robert Dugoni. I write all kinds of different genres. I started out writing legal thrillers. I moved to police procedural mysteries. I've written a 3-book espionage series. I've written literary novels, multiple literary novels. Most recently, I've written a historical thriller called The Killing on the Hill. I went back to doing some legal thrillers. I got a new character out named Kira Dugan. And her first book, Her Deadly Game, is nominated for ITW's Thriller of the Year. So I write in a whole bunch of different genres and a whole bunch of different dimensions.
Yeah, and I hate to follow Bob. I should have gone first because he's done so much, and I'm so one-dimensional. I'm Alex Finlay. I write commercial thrillers. They include Every Last Fear, The Night Shift, and my upcoming release, If Something Happens to Me. Subtle plug there. And I'm a big fan of Bob's and have been for years, and just marvel at his versatility.
That book comes out fairly soon here, right?
Yeah, May 28th.
Oh, you're under 10 days now. The countdown is officially on. It's officially on. Well, that's great. That's great. Like I said, I really appreciate you guys joining us today. Just a little bit about AutoCrit. AutoCrit, we've been around over a decade now, which is crazy to even think. And really, the ethos of our business is to really partner with authors so that you can get a second set of eyes really on your work, right? So we've taken all the writing rules out there and we've kind of baked that with industry knowledge, with looking at books and what works and what doesn't, and bake that into an easy to use tool. And as kind of a precursor to this, as we get into it, hopefully you guys are okay with it, but we're going to look at some of your books and see what comes up. And as kind of a way to demonstrate what we have to offer, as well as get your perspective on your process, both in the writing and the editing, and getting that kind of polish put on it. So very excited about where we have to go today, and kind of go from there. So I would like to kind of start this, and I will follow the chat. So if there's any questions as we go, Gareth is on. We also got Catherine on from our team following. So we'll kind of get to some questions at the end as well. But where I'd like to kind of start the conversation is what drew you guys both to writing thrillers and kind of this genre? There's lots of different options out there, but this is such kind of, and as we get into some of the data, there are some unique things about this genre. So I'd love to hear kind of your perspective on writing in this genre.
Alex, go ahead. You go.
Okay. Yeah, sure. For me, I'm a reader of thrillers, and so I think that's initially got me going into it. I've always been a fan. I remember I'm a lawyer, and so it was natural for me to think legal thrillers. I remember walking in a Barnes and Noble as a lawyer I don't know how many years ago it was, and seeing Bob's book on the table and picking it up and really just kind of being inspired by another lawyer out there doing what I wanted to do. And that's kind of what led me into it. I branched out ultimately into just commercial thrillers, not necessarily legal thrillers, under my pen name, Alex Finlay. And, that's kind of what led me to it.
So is reality or fiction crazier? I guess that's the
I mean, I think in these political times, some would argue that, if Bob and I wrote some of the things that happened on the news or in politics, sometimes people wouldn't believe it. Yeah. So I think there's, it's a little of both, although people aren't turning up dead left and right around me. But otherwise, I think, it can be truth can be stranger than fiction.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah, man, I think we kind of got, I mean, I might've gotten a start on legal thrillers a little bit earlier than you, but we both kind of started to get in as they were tailing off a little bit. They really broke out big in the 80s with, Grisham and Thoreau sort of reinventing the Earl Stanley Gardner, Perry Mason, and legal thrillers have built-in tension, right? There's built-in tension in a courtroom, especially in a criminal trial, right? If a guy gets convicted, he's going to prison. I mean, it's built-in tension. So it's sort of a natural for thrillers. And, back in the 80s when I was, just getting out to start practicing law, they were throwing darts trying to hit lawyers. Can you write a book? Can you write a book? And then like a lot of genres that began to sort of wane a little bit, and then they start to look at what else gets picked up. Thrillers in general for me are just a hell of a lot of fun. Espionage thrillers, which I've written the Charles Jenkins series, it's just, they're chase books. They're chase books. There's somebody's after somebody, and it can be a number of different things. It could be somebody's trying to get out of a country, somebody's trying to get out of a murder, whatever it is, it's a chase book. And so it really allows you to sort of use your imagination to just have fun, just play with it. What would I do here? What if he scuba dives? Let's figure out what scuba diving is. And what if he jumps out of an airplane? I mean, all kinds of different things you can kind of have fun with.
Yeah, the possibilities are really endless, right? So there's not that super structured view that you have to wrap your head around. So it makes it interesting. And so when you put pen to paper in that perspective, are you always thinking about the narrative tension that goes into every word, or what's your structure for kind of the writing process as you're telling that story that's in your mind and getting it onto paper?
Well, me personally, I don't think of any of that stuff. My first draft is literally regurgitating and getting it down on paper, because I don't know what I have until I've written a first draft, and I don't outline. So I don't know where I'm going. I have an idea for a story, and I know how stories are written. I teach a class called the Novel Writing Intensive with Stephen James. And so, I mean, I've been studying story structure for years, so it's a little misleading to say I don't outline. I know it intuitively, but I don't have an ending in mind or anything like that. I love to just see where the characters are going to go, what the characters are going to do, and how they're going to get there. But I think the most important thing, and I emphasize this to, all the students in my classes, is just get it done. There's so many ways to procrastinate. And until you get that first draft done, you don't really know what you have. Don't write to a theme, never write to a theme. Just write the book, and then you'll know what you have. Then you can go back and you can mold, you can shape, you can cut. I have a step-by-step editing process that I have that I can share later. But when I got the edits back from my editor, she wanted me to tweak some things, but her comments were so good that I realized I needed to rewrite it. I knew what the story was then in reading her comments, what clicked with her, and that is what propelled me to rewrite in the second draft. And it wasn't the second draft. I mean, obviously, I'll say one more thing. Never let anyone read your first draft, ever. No one. Not your wife, not your husband, not your life partner, not your critique group, not your mother, not your father. Nobody reads the first draft. Why? Because if nobody's going to read it but you can put anything you want in it. Your character can be the biggest weirdo on the planet. Doesn't matter. No one's going to read it.
So it's really all about taking those blinders off completely, getting it on paper so that you have something to work with. Yeah. And I see some head nods, Alex. Are you?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with everything Bob said. It's about, I think one thing you learn as a lawyer you get that draft down. If you have a deadline for a court, you can't necessarily wordsmith as you go. You can't second guess. You sometimes you just have to get it down. You also learn, I think, in the writing side of lawyer, there's a lot of different kind of lawyers, but that until you have it done, you're not going to have anything to turn into the court. And the other thing you get is just this ethics of editing and accepting edits and not being defensive about the edits you get, because it'll be your client or more senior lawyers, and you just get in this worldview of like, yeah, everything can be edited, but it can't be until you get the thing done and down on paper.
Yeah, absolutely. So, so we talked a little bit about clearly how it sounds. And are you a platter or a pantser?
I'm a little mix of both. I hate platter and pantser too. I don't know why I hate that expression so much. It's thrown around at right? Conferences, but it's basically, are you an outliner or organic writer? I'm a little of both. I think I'm a big thinker. Before I write, I have basically outlined. I take a book, in chunks. I think of the beginning, middle, and end. And when I'm working on the beginning, I just outline in my head where I think it's going to go before I even try and write anything. And by the time it's kind of congealed in my mind, I can write really fast because it just comes out because I'm not, and it allows me the time to kind of let it marinate. And I just think about, any kind of, if I'm laying awake at night, I'm thinking of like, where's the next scene going to go? And I try and just do that until it's just ready. And that's when I write.
Gotcha. That's great. And, as we have interviewed many authors through the platform, our audience always likes to know what your process is. Do you write an hour a day? Do you take a week and put yourself in a room with no windows and no doors? What's your style for getting the pen to paper?
You want to go, Alex?
Yeah, I mean, why don't you go? Because mine's kind of weird.
Okay. So one of the things that being a lawyer did was it taught me how to go to work. I'm not a guy that goes and gets up at 10 o'clock and goes down to Starbucks and sits down with my computer and opens it and works for an hour and then goes for a run and then goes to the golf course. I know for some people that works, and I'm not being critical. I'm just saying from my perspective, what I learned was you put your butt in the chair and you go to work every day. Alex mentioned you don't miss deadlines, and that's, as a lawyer, you can't miss a deadline. You can't. So I've never missed a deadline in my life, and I sort of take pride in that because I think it's important to be professional and to present yourself as a professional, so you're treated as a professional rather than this being a hobby. So, I try to work out 6 days a week. There's that old saying, don't let the old man in, right? Well, I'm 63 now, so I'm trying not to let the old man in. So I work out 6 days a week, but then I'm at my desk by 7, 8 o'clock, and I'm usually here till 4 o'clock. I had a really busy last week. I had to get developmental edits done on one book and copy edits done on another book. And then I have 9 students coming to New York. And so, I was working 10 o'clock at night, doing stuff. I think for me, it's you do what you need to do to get it done in the time you're given.
Awesome.
I hate to follow Bob because he's so much more disciplined than I am. My view is like whatever works for you to get words on a page. If you plan for the perfect situation, particularly if you're working while you're, trying to do this in the beginning, you're never going to finish the book. I was a big, when I was as a practicing lawyer, when I started deciding to do this, I would ride the subway to and from, I lived in Washington, D.C., and I would write in the morning on the way to work and on the way home. And at the end of the week, I would, kind of combine whatever I had, but I had words on a page to work with. What's happened is I've carried that on, in which I do a first draft of my book on my phone, which everyone seems to find very strange. But I do initial scenes while I'm walking. I go on long walks in Washington, D.C., and that's where I get a first dump. They're not very good chapters, but at the end of the week, I basically email these things to myself and I dump them in a Word document, and I have a lot to work with. Not a lot of it survives, But for me, it's a lot less daunting than sitting down at a blank page and just starting from there. And then once it's in a document, that's when I start the real work, which is the editing and refining and clearing out all the garbage I wrote on, some highway.
Right.
You raise a really good point, which is writers have to do what works for them, because what works for one doesn't work for all. And I'm a big believer in not creating anxiety for yourself. I mean, people talk about writer's block. Well, writer's block is anxiety. I mean, it's stress, and it's having that deadline or whatever you're worried about. So you really got to, I was at a conference one time. I had a guy come up to me and he said, I want to be where you're at. I'm a lawyer and I want to be where you're at. I want to be the guy writing books, and I just don't know where I can find the time to do it. And, I got on my high horse here and said, well, listen, you just have to find time. And if it's really that important to you, you got to get up at 4 a.m. and do what you need to do. And he looked at me and he said, well, I do that, but I have 5 kids under the age of 10. And I went, I'm sorry, I'm an ass. I realize I'm an ass. I said, listen, here's what you should do. Go get these 5 books on the craft and study them in your free time and devote your life to raising your kids, which is the most important thing you can do, being a good husband, being a good father. And then you're going to have that moment where your kids are more self-dependent, independent, and you're going to have that ability, and you're going to have all that background from studying all those books on the craft, and you're going to be able to jump right in.
And it's so interesting because, obviously we work with authors at all stages, right? So, and it comes down to the fact that this is an art form, right? And there is no right or wrong answer on any of it, right? And as we get into the tool and things that we help you focus on, we're just giving information. And so it comes to, how do you want to interpret that information? And to your point, how do you want to bake in the author lifestyle into your regular routine, right? So there is no one size fits all, but everyone who is in our audience, right, that is tuning in for this, has a desire to get words on the page and to tell a story. And that can look very different to very different people. And to me, it's fascinating because the goal of that kind of published book at the end can get to fruition in so many different ways. So it's fascinating, and we appreciate you telling how you do it, because I think it's very inspirational to those that are trying to get to that point, and who are trying to get their books out, whether it's 1 book or 20 book, their 20th book. So it's super helpful, I think, to kind of see yourself or parts of yourself and other people who are successfully doing that. So from my perspective, this is an art form. There's no right answer. And, it's just finding what's right for you and holding yourself accountable. That's the other piece, is that if you don't put goals in place and ways to achieve them, then you'll be here in 5 years still kind of talking about the same thing. So. We did have a question before we kind of move on to kind of how much research do you do, and when you're looking at a certain book, or is it all kind of stuff that you already know?
A lot. A lot. I usually know when it's time to start writing when the research starts repeating itself. And what I mean by that is, when I wrote The World Played Chess, which was a literary novel, coming of age story of 3 young men, and one of the men goes off to Vietnam, I wanted to really understand what it meant to go off as an 18, 19-year-old young man and be in the bush fighting. And so I must have read 12 or 13 firsthand accounts. And when the stories started to repeat themselves, then I said, okay, I have a much better understanding of what these young men went through. And then you have to do what you just said, is you have to stop procrastinating and say, okay, now it's time to write. Because you can fall in love with your research. You really can.
Yeah. And that once again is showing that you can have different approaches. I barely do any research at the beginning. If I write, and if there's an FBI agent who does something, I just guess. If there's a doctor or a medical issue, I guess. And then about 2 weeks before my deadline, I start to think about all the, unfriendly emails I'm going to get about my errors, and I start picking up the phone and calling experts and trying to make things plausible. And I defend it's totally inefficient, but I defend it on two grounds. One of which is what Bob mentioned, which is I know myself. If I got into the research, I'd use it to procrastinate. I'd get lost in the sauce. I'd never get words on a page. And second, for me, writing thrillers where, my whole credo is like, say as much as you can with as few words as possible, keep the story just going. That's just been my approach. And I think that by guessing or just taking my best guess of what the research would be, and then going back, I'm always under such a limited time. It forces me really to pick that one thing or two things that are accurate, that show some level of authenticity, without bogging down the story. Because I know myself, if I did a bunch of research, I'd want to show off and put like 2 pages of information dump in it and show all the hard work I did. Where this is just, it really forces me to pick those one or two things. But I'm also not writing historicals or having to do some of that harder work Bob's doing.
Sure.
The different genres definitely are going to dictate. I always marvel at the people that write about medieval England. How the hell do they know that stuff? I mean, it's just crazy. But I just wrote a historical World War II book. It's coming out, I think, December of 2025, called Hold Strong. I wrote it with these two teachers, professors, who did the research. And I just got the copy edits back. And oh my Lord, the person that did the copy edits, I mean, I was just amazed at how they were able to say, in this diary of the Bataan Death March, it says blank on it, that actually this happened on this day, not on. I mean, those people are dialed in. There are books out there that tell them they wore leather shoes and had birds on their arm. I mean, there's something. There's diaries out there for historical novels and science. I mean, it's crazy. It really is, the amount of work that goes into those books.
Absolutely. And it shows, right? When you get the final product and it has that authentic feel because the details are correct. But you don't need to go to that level for every book either, right? No. And that's the fun of all of this, is kind of picking the scale that you're on. So
Alex, what's the one thing you cannot get wrong in a thriller?
Guns.
There you go. Do not mess up on the gun. Do not say that the Glock had a safety on it if it doesn't have a safety on it.
Yeah. And the only other rule is don't kill a dog in thrillers.
Don't kill a dog.
You can do anything you want to a person.
No, do not. Kill a dog.
Excellent rules to live by, right? Absolutely. So we talked a little bit about kind of the structure. I'm going to kind of shift gears, if that's okay. So let's assume that we've got the writing on the page. We've done the research. We've got that first draft done, and I'd like to kind of get into a little bit of that editing process and kind of tie together where, while AutoCrate definitely helps with kind of planning, we have got planning tools and outlining tools and brainstorming tools and all that kind of stuff. Today's, I'd like to open the conversation about the editing side. And so just as a little bit of a primer, and I think I can present here if I've got it all set up. Do we have a volunteer, Bob or Alex, who would like to go first in an analysis of a book?
Whatever's handy for you.
All right. You spoke first, Alex. So let's go.
All right.
Let's go on yours, and I think I can share here. Present. Share screen. Okay. All right. Can you guys see? My screen? Because I lost you on my view.
I do not see your screen. I mean, I see the Alex and me and you, but I don't see anything
Okay.
more.
Hold on. There we go. Is that working now?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And actually, before we kind of dig into that, I want to give you kind of a more of an overview, I think, and then we'll kind of dig into yours, Alex. But right now, what I have open is the AutoCrit screen. So this is our writer's desk, and this is kind of the main part where you can kind of come in, and we have an area where you can write your book. Like I said, we've got some planning tools and note cards and things like that where you can kind of keep yourself organized. But like I said, we're going to kind of focus on the editing side. We have two levels of analysis that we can provide. One is on the developmental editing side. And I've kind of, this is the demo file, so it's, Wizard of Oz, and we can kind of take a look at it all. But this is going to basically look at all of your chapters, and it's going to give some feedback, right? What was the synopsis of every chapter? What was the conflict? Who are the characters? What was the world building happening? The possible contradiction events, the analysis of your timeline, the plot threads, and genre analysis. And this is really kind of gives you that, you said initially, don't let anybody read your book initially, but this is a great way to have someone read your book and get that feedback personally in just a few minutes to give you that feedback. And what I love about this kind of developmental editing side is that you can kind of look at, maybe I just want to look at the timeline across my book very quickly, right? So, first chapter, Dorothy, this is what happened to Dorothy, and then the council with the Munchkins, these are the highlighted things. And so you can get that kind of initial feedback on what you're doing and where the possible issues are. And so it's really kind of a fun way, like I said, to get that initial kind of a beta read on it. The other area that we look at is more the line editing side of things. And that's going to go and look at the actual word construction and pacing and things like that. And that's where I think it would be great to kind of jump over and see how it landed for you guys. So this is The Night Shift. And do you want to tell us maybe a little bit about this book before we dive into the analysis of it?
Sure. It's a couple books ago. Let me think. It's a story about on New Year's Eve, 1999, a group of employees at a Blockbuster Video are slain with one survivor. Flash forward 15 years in the same town at a ice cream store. A similar crime occurs with the employees there. Again, a single survivor. And the question is, are the crimes related? And the survivors of each awful workplace event kind of get together to uncover the truth.
Interesting. Okay, gotcha. So, right in line with the thriller, and suspense kind of theme and plot storyline there. So that's great. So so what we are doing here on the kind of in the report that I've pulled up is, like I said, we've loaded this document in. It's about 70,000 words, and we've gone and we've done an analysis of that based on our analysis of the standard thrillers, that we've done our research on. And really what this does is we've analyzed your writing based on the proven characteristics, and we've kind of put our best practices into it as well. But you can also just look at only just thrillers, like without our autocrit analysis. So, there's kind of two ways to look at it. But drum roll, and I've already given the analysis. This is amazing, right? You've got a score on ours of 89.7. No, this isn't a grade or anything like that. Don't think of it as
never get an A. Gee,
it's a letter grade. But you can see that we have like this, kind of green scale, which is really kind of where you want to be in. And again, kind of going back to my art versus science type of a thing, this is art. There's not a right answer. There's not a, exact things. But how we come up with this is we kind of break it down into some categories, right? So first we're looking at pacing and momentum, and then dialogue usage, strong writing, word choice, and then repetition. And then we kind of put all of that together to kind of give you that score. So, and even the system says, amazing. This is an excellent overall score in line with bestseller expectations. So there, but however, there's always, a couple of things that we can look at. And that's what I kind of wanted to dive into a little bit today. And so really, when we look at pacing, right? So obviously we know that thrillers are very fast paced. And this scenario, you're even more fast paced. Well, it has, I'm looking at your document here. So only 1.2% of your paragraphs are slow paced, which means it's super fast paced, which is amazing, right? Where the average thriller would have about 120 slow paced paragraphs in comparison with the same amount of words that you have in there. And so, let me see, I think So, this is all well and good, but what we also do is now you can go and run an individual report from Autocrit. I have pre-run this and ran pacing, and we can actually point out exactly the what we consider slow-paced paragraphs, right? So it would typically be ones with more backstory or passive, or we've had this whole algorithm that we're going to kind of analyze your work on it. The thing about pacing, as I don't have to teach the experts on this, is that slow-paced paragraphs are fine, but it's clearly better to be sprinkled rather than dumped, as we like to say. So you don't want a whole bunch of slow-paced paragraphs all kind of put together. But you can see just by connecting from a demonstration purpose that, from here, these are overall, you're in excellent shape. But we can, clearly go and see that maybe I want to go and take a look at my slow-paced paragraphs, and I can just go and click on those and see what those are. If that makes sense.
Yeah. Interesting.
Thoughts on that? Any analysis on your fast-paced thriller?
No, I think it's fascinating.
Fascinating, right? And similarly, in the pacing and momentum, we're also looking at average words per paragraph. Again, you came out below what the average thriller would be, so shorter paragraphs. You can see here that the paragraph by word count, over 2,000 of your paragraphs were, 0 to 25 words, and only 36 were very long. And then your average words per sentences is again pacing at a quicker pace, a shorter way to go. Then shifting over to dialogue, we can look at the average sentences with dialogue, just a little bit under. But again, it's, this is not a good or a bad thing, right? It's just kind of an analysis of where you are in comparison. We also look at things like dialogue tags, where you use said and asked, and others. We're a big proponent, and it looks like you are as well, of just using said and asked. So that's great, right in line. And yeah. I think, hold on. I think if we look at, scroll down to some other things that we are looking at, cliches. So this one was the one that jumped out at me. And I think you actually mentioned this when you might have been poking around a little bit, that cliches might be an area that that kind of popped out. So this is the one of the, where it was 105 cliches instead of the average of 71. So if you're okay, we can bop over and take a look at that individual report.
Sure.
Great. Okay, so yeah, so again, compared to thriller, you're at 105 over 71. We can see that, seen better days. And it's really easy because we can just click on the cliche and it'll jump to that spot in your document. So you can, anything that we're going to show, we're going to give you an easy way to find that so that you can do the edits right in the system. And so in this say, the shag carpet that has seen better days, the woman has also seen better days, right? So, this will show a repetition. My guess is that this is on purpose, and that makes a whole lot of sense because you're using it in that stylistic way, but it's a really great option for you to be able to kind of see it highlighted right next to each other, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah, so 15 minutes of fame, that was another one I think that we have there a couple of times. So you can just kind of see that go. So is clear, any other commentary on that, or I can keep rolling?
No, I mean, keep rolling. I think it's interesting. When I'm in final edits, I'm always looking for repetitive words or echoes or, unusual alliteration. So it's interesting tool.
Yeah, and so you mentioned repeated words, right? And that was the other one that kind of jumped out a little bit. And like by a little bit, I'm talking like very little. Overall, I'm really thrilled, no pun intended, with how these books came out from both of you guys, but repeated words. So, and I did pre-run that. So repeated words is exactly kind of how you mentioned it. We have a report that will look at word frequency and look at the words that are used throughout the entire document. But repeated words is going to be very specific to how close you used words to each other, right? So in this case, scotch was used 4 times in one sentence, right? Tumbler of scotch, always drink scotch, beyond the scotch guys, right? And again, that's very well could be stylistic, which again, reading this, it makes sense. But sometimes we are very, just as we continue to use the same words over and over again. And so by quickly being able to see those instances, it is helpful when it just literally pops off the page and being highlighted. Questions, comments?
None so far.
All right. I'm going to pop back to StreamYard for just a second and make sure that are we rolling along okay? So before I jump kind of into the further analysis, I'd be curious kind of your editing process, Alex, and how this process, what's your process in general, but how you think looking at both the developmental and the line editing are part of your process.
Yeah, I mean, I'll talk about line editing. I mean, basically for me, as I'm writing, when I start a writing day, I go back with what I wrote the prior day or some section, and I lightly edit that just to get my head back into it as I'm reading. And I kind of just keep looping back so every time I start writing a new day, I read a little bit or maybe a lot of what I'd previously written, but edit as I read. So by the time I get a full draft, there has been some level of line edits that go on, but it's only after I get the full dump of the full manuscript that I really, really just focus on the editing parts, both developmental and line edits. And for me, one thing is you're by the time the book's done, you're so familiar with it. You've read it so many times, you miss things. So I'm always trying to mix it up of like, I'll print it out on paper and I'll edit it that way. I'll read it on the screen. I'll read it out loud. I try and find different ways to force myself to focus and try and see things that I might not because I'm so familiar with it. And otherwise, it's just a matter of, you know, I'm always looking to cut. I'm always looking to tighten. And that's my kind of main thing.
So can we dive into a little bit more of making sure that it's suspenseful enough, right? Like how do you edit for suspense?
You know, I think there's different things you can do to build suspense. You know, for me, it's been as you're resolving questions as you go. You know, it's always about, for me, raising questions in the reader's mind, but then resolving some of them. But then the resolution raises another question. And then, you know, as far as just building things in, I don't really think of it, you know, diagnostically when I'm building suspense. Just, you know, as I'm writing these scenes, I know I want them to be fast. I know that I want them to be conflict, and there tend to be short chapters that leave you asking a question, so you want to turn the next page. I think Bob would probably have a much better answer than that, but that's
and you bring up an interesting point, because I did look when I was comparing the style of just how long your chapters were and sentences and things like that, right? You both had kind of a conflicting different style on that. So yeah, do you want to tell us a little bit about your process and how you make sure that you edit for suspense?
You know, I don't know if I edit for suspense so much as I edit out the non-suspense. I look at long paragraphs like you're talking about, and I say, what am I trying to convey here? And do I need all this to convey it? Can I convey it in dialogue instead of in a narrative, which is much more interesting, right? Thrillers are action and dialogue. So is there a way that I can convey it in dialogue? And I'll do that. So I'm looking for what I know are sort of my mistakes: info dumps, too much information, character descriptions that stop the story. Does the reader really give a crap what this particular character looks like?
Right.
Can you say he's menacing, as opposed to he was 6'5" and 240 pounds and had a tattoo on his right bicep and this and that, and then all it, which really does, it slows the story down. I mean, I always say to my students, how many of you, when I walked into the classroom, the first thing you said is, "Oh, look what he's wearing"? And yet, for some reason, when we introduce characters in a book, it's almost always they tell us what he's wearing. Do we really need that, right? Or is it just slowing the story down? So I go back and I look at all those things that I know that I'm guilty of, and I try to get rid of them. Now, there are also, as Anthony was talking about, there's also those time-honored things like the ticking clock.
Somebody actually just brought that up on the chat, right?
But you want it to be organic. You don't want it to be artificial. So one of the rewrites that I just did on the 11th Tracy Crosswhite book was in the climactic scene. It's one day. It's 8 hours, and it's about 170 pages, but it's one day. Because before, what I had is it was happening, and then it was the next morning, and then she went and did something, and then you know what I mean? And I realized that was a mistake, that once I have her in that moment, I needed to keep her in that moment. So ticking clock is a great way to do it. If you're writing in multiple points of view, then ending one point of view on a high point of tension before you start the next point of view, and then coming back to that prior point of view, not too far out. What I always say to students is, you can tease a reader, you can flirt with a reader, but don't tease them. We all know the difference between flirting and teasing, right?
Yeah.
Someone flirts with us, we're flattered. Someone teases us, we're not. You know, so if you end at a high point of tension and 150 pages later you come back to that high point of tension, it's not a high point of tension, it's a high point of aggravation, right? So, you know, there are those time traditions that thrillers, you expect in thrillers. Readers expect them in thrillers, right? He jumped out of the plane and forgot the parachute. End of scene, next scene, right? And then the reader's going, wait a minute, what the hell just happened? Right? And so those kind of things. But I think the other issue that's equally important, and it's one of the things that I think you just demonstrated that AutoCrit can do for a writer, is getting rid of the material that slows the narrative down.
Yeah, I'll jump in just on one thing Bob said. One tip I got, it may have been from Bob years ago, is for the thriller, don't write your way into the scene or write your way out of the scene. Like, write to the middle. So don't start the, you know, if the character finds a dead body in the kitchen, don't, you know, have him get up, brush his teeth, take a shower, do all those things that, and then walk in the kitchen and find the body. Start the scene with just a little bit setting, like it's morning, holding a cup of coffee, and you find the body. And it's the same with the ending the scene. You know, you could end the scene Bob mentioned with the guy jumping out of the parachute without a parachute and have him falling, and this happens and this happens and this happens. But it's much more suspenseful to just end there and then pick up, particularly if you do multiple point of view, pick up a couple chapters later, so the reader is thinking, wow, what's going to happen, and you know, go from there.
Sure. And I mean, it really also then goes to not just the I guess the structure of the sentence, the paragraph, the chapter, but the individual word, right? And I think that that's also very interesting as you look at things like word choice. And so if I can maybe shift over, this might be a good opportunity to just kind of have a little bit of a conversation on sorry, let me get to share again.
You know, the other thing I think that important that you're talking about is knowing what your strengths and your weaknesses are. So I have a editorial card taped to the bottom of my computer screen. And when I get done before my final draft, I go through and I look for the words saw, heard, smelled, tasted, because those can all be presumed.
Yep.
She saw the birds in the trees, right? The birds sat in the trees. It can be presumed she saw it if we're in her point of view. But I'm always guilty of doing that. So sure. I literally have a card of about, I don't know, 20 things that I know that I'm bad of the. She got into the bottom of the boat. She got in whatever the bottom of the boat is called, right? She got into the blank. And I was teaching a class for Thriller Fest one time, and everyone was like, "Can we have that card? Can we see the card?" But really, it's just knowing what your weaknesses are. What do you tend to do a lot? I tend to use the word considered too much.
Yep.
I know that.
Yeah, we all do, right? Our vocabulary as human beings is only so big. And so we, just as normal everyday speaking and therefore writing is, we're going to pull from that small bank of words, and really that's the opportunity to be able to see that on the page so that quickly, and we'll take a look at that, is that, okay, how can I make this more interesting? Because by making sure that each word earns its spot, then you're making sure that person that's reading it can actually feel what's going on, rather than just, like you said, be a subsequent observer of it. So let's dig in, because I think and I'm not going to take long. I'm just going to kind of look at a report here that we have that talks right to that, right? So we've got a category on both strong writing and word choice. And so strong writing is going to look at, adverbs and passive indicators and showing versus telling. We already talked about cliches, but also kind of how you start your sentences, and generic descriptions, like you said. And we also have a personal words and phrases. So if you have that list, there you can actually just go and enter that list in. I don't have it set up right now, but you can go and enter that list, and it will show you all of those words directly in the system, highlighted, just as you have. So it's a very simple way of doing that. But yes, so here's like our showing versus telling. And so we're going to look at things like get and know, and it was, and knew, and heard, watched, etc. And so again, even right now I have it like compared to general fiction, but it's just a way to kind of let you see those kind of things that you might not see. So it lets you add a separate pair of perspective glasses on, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. I mean, she knew is another one of my bugaboos. You know, she knew they were going to come in the side door.
Right.
If it's in her point of view, they were going to come in the side door. I mean,
exactly. So
you need that. And it goes back to the way that I write. When I write, I just write. I don't self-edit when I'm writing. So I have to have an editorial process in order to catch the things I know I don't do well.
Sure. Absolutely. And so let me, I think, what else did I had one thing that as we were talking there that I was going to talk about. Sorry for keeping clicking around. Yeah, we looked at showing versus telling. Something as simple as adverbs, right? We all know that adverbs are as Stephen King said, the road to hell is paved with adverbs. But as we look, could we, if I look at the overall perspective, the count is less, but there are some ones that are worse than others per se, right? So quickly might be one of those ones that you want to take a look at. And so based on our recommendations, remove about 15 out of the 37 that we have based on the analysis. So I quickly, then rising quickly, changed quickly, right? So again, it's being able to look at these and know what your ticks are so that you can kind of go and get those fixed. So just a little bit of show and tell there from what we do, but it sounds like these are all part of your process, and go from there. Yes, as Paige says, all adverbs can't be bad, and they're not all bad, but to be able to go and take a look at them and to kind of get that perspective. And that's really where I just think it's very interesting to be able to look at that, especially, after you get the draft on paper.
Yeah, I mean, Stephen King says, adverbs are part of the English language for a reason.
Right?
Adjectives and adverbs. I mean, you just got to be careful that you don't overdo it.
Yeah. I think you just want to be, what I like about the program is that, it gives you a chance to be deliberative about it. You often want to just tell. You don't need to show everything, as Bob was saying. It's a mix between showing and telling. But having a list of my crutch words or instances where I'm telling just to cross check, I think that any resource you have we're always trying to be better, and we all have our quirks and our bad habits. So for me, I played around with the program, and as I mentioned to you off screen, and it's definitely something I'm gonna try out in my next manuscript.
That's awesome. So let's go to just, I guess there's a couple of questions that we had come in from the group here. Where's the line between indulging and economizing character development? Any thoughts on that?
Character development is not what they're wearing or where they went to school. Character development is letting us see them in a scene react to the other characters in the scene. What I always say is it's no different. You walk into a room and there are 5 people there you've never met, and you start talking to them. You pretty clearly can decide, I don't really like this one particular person, and this is somebody that I'm going to get along with. It has nothing to do with what they're wearing. It has nothing to do with where they went to school. It has to do with what is their interaction with you. How are they responding to certain things? What are they saying? How are they saying them? I just had this incident happen, and it was very clear to me that the person was not being genuine, and I knew they were not being genuine, and I knew that was going to be a problem if this person didn't change. So that's character development, is how they interact with other characters and the circumstances that they face. It's not what they're wearing, where they went to school, who their parents were, all that other stuff. Let us see them. Let us see the character in action, and we will begin to understand who they are and what's important to them and what isn't.
Any additional thoughts there, Alex?
No, I mean, I think that nailed it. I have nothing better to add.
And that's not to say that you can't use things like he drove up in a red Porsche or he checked his Rolex, right? Those are called markers. Okay, those are things that, somebody sees somebody drive up in a red Porsche, they get an immediate response to it. Oh, this guy's got money, or this guy's showing off, whatever that is, right? And so you can use those things, but it's not so much reflective on the individual that drives up in the Porsche. It's reflective on the person that's making a judgment based upon the marker that they're seeing.
Gotcha. That makes total sense. And again, we're back to perspective, right? It's all about being in the right perspective, throughout the process. Going back to another question. Let's see. What advice would you give authors concerning thrillers? You get the guns right and the don't kill the dog, but how about steps in an investigation? What do you do in what order? How do your protagonists respond to the inciting incident? That sounds like a mouthful, but maybe you can take a piece of that.
I mean, I think it's all just where the scene's going to go. I think in terms of scenes, I think, like I said, I treat the book at the beginning, middle, and end, because if I think of the book as the whole thing when I'm starting, it's too intimidating to get going. And so with the beginning, I'll have a loose idea of like, where do I want to be at the end of Act 1? And usually I'm finding the characters in the beginning who are going to be my protagonists and my other characters. And it's really, for me, building scene A to scene B to scene C, and going along the way. So I actually forgot what the question was. So I'll let Bob jump in.
I think that it's the steps in the investigation and
that's research and research. And if you're going to do a procedural, you do, unlike what I do, you do want to get it right. But you just, it's all a balance. You don't want it to be a textbook on, police procedure. You want it to be a story that's interesting, that you want to follow, that has just enough of the procedural aspects to drive the story forward and have a ring of authenticity.
I love that. I mean, that just, because it's the balance, right? It's about making it real, but in the end, it's a story, right? So how do you kind of blend all of that together? And that's at every level, right? It's from the overall story structure down to the character development to all the way down to the individual words on the page and how they're crafted to really how they make you feel. So it's brilliant.
Well, for every scene, I ask myself one thing, does the scene tell me something, move the plot forward, or tell me something about the character? And if it doesn't do one of those two things, then I may not need that scene at all. It may be just a cut, or it may be that I need to add something to it. If I particularly like the scene anyway, and find a way to get one of those two things in there. And that is something I do when I'm editing. Every scene has to have a purpose, and it's usually one of those two.
Absolutely. Great. Well, I can't believe it. We're at the top of the hour already. I do want to pause for a moment and give a shout out to Thriller Fest, right? Because that's why we're all here. New York in a week and a half. I think you guys are both, Bob, you said you're teaching. Why don't you give a little bit of Thriller Fest shout out?
Yeah, we're both teaching at
okay.
Master classes. And then I'm also teaching a session at, what is it called? Writercraft on Wednesday. I'll be teaching a class on plotting, etc. It's a conference that I think it gives you an opportunity to, get away from your computer and meet people in the industry and get a chance to just see some people you don't get to see very often.
Absolutely. Live and in person, right?
Yeah. And I'll say, I mean, for me, what the transition from lawyer to writer, that conference and the organization ITW really was critical to me, both in terms of, getting to hear pros like Bob teach a class. And if you can't go live, they have a bunch of online resources. And it would have cut my learning curve time down as far as like just the basics of the thriller craft had I, known about ITW and Thriller Fest back in the day, or it was kind of new then.
Sure.
But I highly recommend it. I think it can really change your writing life. And we have so many success stories of people who go to Thriller Fest, who pitch to an agent, who then get a book deal. And I think, I can't say enough good things about the organization.
Yeah, this is our 3rd year to sponsor. We are very excited to continue our sponsorship. We do have, if you are interested in AutoCrit, we do have a special offer just for Thriller Fest audience. It's autocrit.com/thrillerfest. And would love for everybody to check it out. And really, I love it. It's an opportunity to get kind of the people, the tools, the processes all together, and really kind of springboard, in this case, into the summer with an opportunity to kind of get your goals accomplished for the year from that perspective. So yeah, it's a great time. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you guys, learning about your process, your books. I appreciate you letting us kind of take a look under the hood a little bit with our tools. And kind of go from there. So we really appreciate the time.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, me too. You sold me on AutoCrit. I'm going to give it a go.
Awesome. Awesome. Thanks, guys. You guys have a good one. Take care, everyone.